This lecture is about factoring trinomials that have a leading coefficient other than 1. So they have the form ax squared plus bx plus c. In our first example, we have 2y squared plus 7y minus 15. And so we want to factor this into two groups. And so we want to factor this 2y squared. And the only way for us to factor this is to factor it as 2y times y. There's no other way. We need to have the y in both sets of parentheses, and the only way for us to factor 2 is 2 times 1. So it has to be 2y and y. Now we need to figure out how to factor 15 so that we'll end up with the right term in the middle, this 7y. The only two ways to factor 15 are 1 and 15 and 3 and 5. So we need to guess which one of these two factorizations we need. I'm going to guess that it's the 3 and the 5, and so I'm going to put a 3 in my first group and a 5 in my second group, and then just check and see what would happen if we were to FOIL this out. When we multiply the inners together, we would get 3y, and when we multiply these outers together, we would get 10y. So is there some way for me to make 7y using a 3y and a 10y? And there is. I want the 7y to be positive, so that means I want the 10 to be positive and the 3 to be negative. And when we add negative 3y and positive 10y together, we do get the 7y in the middle that we need. The 3y needs to be negative, and this is the multiplication that we're doing to get that. So this needs to be negative so that we get the negative 3y we need for the middle term, and then we need to get a positive 10y when we multiply these two together, so this needs to be a plus. So our factorization here is 2y minus 3 times y plus 5. Our second example here is 2x squared plus 7x plus 3. So again, we want to factor this into two groups, and the only way to factor this 2x squared is to factor it as 2x and x. And there's only one way to factor 3. It's going to be 1 times 3. I just need to figure out if I put the 1 here or the 3 here, and then the other one goes in the other set of parentheses. So let's just try this. I'm going to try it as 1 and 3. And see what happens when I would do FOIL. So 1 times x is 1x, and 2x times 3 is 6x. And I need a positive 7, so if both of these are positive and we add them together, we will get the 7x in the middle that we need. Okay, so here we get 1x when we multiply this positive 1x, and so we need this one to be positive, and we want this one to be positive 6, so that's going to also get a plus sign. So our factorization here is going to be 2x plus 1 times x plus 3. Example C here is 12x cubed plus 11x squared plus 2x. Notice here that all of these terms have an x in them, so we need to factor an x out. But we have 12, 11, and 2 for our numbers, so I can't factor a number out because the 11 is prime and only 11 and 1 divide itself. So we're just going to factor out that x. And when we do that, we're going to get 12x squared plus 11x plus 2. So we have our x in front, and now we want to factor this into two groups. And 12 can be factored quite a few different ways now. It can be factored as 1 and 12, and 2 and 6, and 3 and 4. So I'm not sure which one I need of those three, so I'm going to fix the constant this time instead. There's only one way to factor 2. It's going to have to be factored as 1 times 2. So we can fix those and put those in there. And both of the first terms are going to contain an x. I just don't know what numbers I need to put in front of there. If it's going to be the 1 and 12 or the 2 and 6 or the 3 and 4, I also don't know which order I need to put them in. So we need to guess and check to figure that out. And so we can try the 1 and 12. So put a 1 in front of the first x and a 12 in front of the second. And then when I do FOIL, when I do the inners, I get 12x. And when I do the outers, I get 2x. And what I need to have for my x term is 11x, and there's no way to create 11x with 12x and 2x. So that was the wrong set of numbers to use. We can try the 1 and the 12 in the other order and see what happens there. So if I try to do 12x in the first group and 1x in the second group, then when I multiply my inners, I get 1x, and when I multiply the outers, I get 24x. What I need is 11x, and there's no way to create 11x with 1x and 24x, so that is also not the correct way to do this. So 1 and 12 didn't work, so now let's try 2 and 6. Now when I multiply my inners, I get 6x, and when I multiply the outers, I get 4x. And again, there's no way to create an 11 with 6 and 4, so this is also not the correct way to factor this. So we need to try this again, and maybe it's 6x and 2x. Now when I multiply the inners, I get 2x. And when I multiply the outers, I get 12x. And again, no way to form an 11 with that. So that is also incorrect. So now I need to try the 3 and the 4. So maybe it's 3x and 4x. So now when I multiply my inners together, I get 4x. And when I multiply the outers together, I get 6x. And again, this will give me 10x, and that doesn't work. So try it the last way and see if that works. So that would be 4x and 3x. When I multiply the inners together, I get 3x. And when I multiply the outers together, I get 8x. And 3x and 8x is in fact 11x what I need. I need a positive 3x and a positive 8x to create that positive 11x that I need in the middle. So both of these will get a plus sign, and then when we multiply these plain numbers together, we get the positive 2 that we need as well. So our final answer here is x times the quantity 4x plus 1 times 3x plus 2. Example D is negative 7x squared minus 33x plus 10. I don't like my x squared term to be negative, so I'm going to factor a negative 1 out of this. And when I do that, then it just changes all of these signs. So I'm going to have a positive 7x squared plus 33x minus 10. So again, we're factoring this. There is another method for factoring other than doing the guess and check, and I just like to show you that once so that you see it, and maybe we'll do it on the next one as well, just so that you can see it a couple of times to see how it works. And some of you may prefer this method over the guess and check method. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the plain old number, negative 10, and we're going to multiply that to the number, the leading coefficient, the 7. And when I multiply these together, I get negative 70. So now what we want to do is we want to factor this negative 70 so that when I add the factors together, I get the number in the middle. So that's 33. So how can I factor these so that when I add the factors together I get positive 33? Well, the way that we can do that is with a 35 and a 2. I want positive 33, so I would have to make this a negative 2 and a positive 35. So the reason that I'm doing this is so that I can rewrite my original polynomial so that it has 4 terms, and I can use the factor by grouping method on it. So that's what I'm going to do next. I'm going to rewrite this polynomial in the parentheses, and I'm just changing this term in the middle to negative 2x plus 35x. That's why we do this step over here on the right. So it would be 7x squared. And again, instead of writing this plus 33x, we're going to write minus 2x plus 35x, and then minus 10. So if we combine these middle two terms, we'll end up with exactly what we started out with. So we're just making it look different so that we can use the factor by grouping on it. So I'm going to group the 7x squared minus 2x together, and then always put a plus sign in between your two groups, and then 35x minus 10. So don't forget about your negative 1 out in front. And so from the first group, all we can factor out of there is a 7, and we'll be left with 7x minus 2 in our parentheses. And 35x and 10x, we can factor out a 5. And when we factor that 5 out, we'll be left with 7x minus 2. Now notice that what we have left in our parentheses is exactly the same, and when you're doing this factoring by grouping method, this should always end up happening. And so we're going to factor that out next. And so don't forget about this negative 1 in the front, and then we're factoring this 7x minus 2 out. And when we factor it out of the first term in here, we're left with x. And when we factor it out of the second group here, we're left with this 5. So my final answer is negative 1 times the quantity 7x minus 2 times x plus 5. So again, you could do this with the guess and check method, but this is another method that works as well, and I just wanted you to see it in case it's something that you like and want to use. Example E is 2x to the 5th minus x cubed, y squared, minus 15xy to the 4th. And so all of these terms contain an x, and so we're going to factor an x out. And that's going to leave me with 2x to the 4th minus x squared y squared minus 15y to the 4th. So now we need an x squared y squared term in the middle, so when I set up my groups, instead of having just an x like we did before, we're going to have an x squared. So we're going to factor this 2x to the 4th as 2x squared and x squared. And then I need a y squared also when I do this FOIL, so we want to factor this y to the 4th as y squared and y squared. Then after we set up this, the only other thing we have to do now is factor negative 15 in the right way, so that when we do our FOIL we end up with this negative 1x squared y squared in the middle. So there were two ways for us to factor 15, 1 and 15, and 3 and 5. So I'm just going to check the 3 and 5. It looks like it's the one that's going to work, so we're going to try that one first. And so we'll try to put a 3 in front of the first y squared and a 5 in front of the second y squared and see what happens when I do FOIL. When I multiply the inners, I get 3x squared y squared. And when I multiply the outers, I get 10x squared y squared. And what I need in the middle is a negative x squared y squared, and there's no way for me to create a negative 1x squared y squared with 3 and 10. So the 3 and 5, are in the wrong place. So let's try it the other way around. Let's try it with a 5 here and a 3 here. So when I do this first multiplication, I get 5x squared y squared. And when I multiply the outers, I get 6x squared y squared. And now these have a difference of 1, 5, and 6 do, and so I can create this negative x squared y squared in the middle. Remember, there's an implied 1 in front of this. And so I want the result to be negative, so I'm going to make this negative 6x squared y squared, and this one will be positive 5y squared. So when we do this multiplication, we want our result to be positive, so we need a plus sign in between these two. And when we do this outer multiplication, we need it to be negative, and so we need this to be minus. And then this also, just make sure that you check this last term here. It will give us the negative 15y to the fourth that we need. So this factors as x times the quantity 2x squared plus 5y squared times x squared minus 3y squared. And that is the end of our lecture on factoring a trinomial with a leading coefficient other than 1.